All. This is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from DrBeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So, the concerning study today is from Oxford University. It is about the brain size reduction, global brain size reduction, all of it, in patients with mild COVID. So, not hospitalized, but mild COVID. And what they did was, researchers, they had been taking images of some patients. It is part of those images were part of UK Biobank, and the images were not taken for figuring out COVID or the result of COVID. These were taken just like that, and there were 700 and I believe 85 people. And what was happening was that these patients would have these persons, not patients, will have their images taken at regular intervals just to make sure that there is research going on for the type of brain changes with age or other factors. These researchers found about 400, actually 401 people who, during their two consecutive scans, between them, they got COVID infection. And the average duration from the diagnosis of the infection to the second scan was more than 100 days. So there is a pretty long distance between the second image and the infection. And the previous image was taken before the infection. So the benefit of that is that if there is any brain change that was already present in this person, then the previous image can help rule that change out or identify that change. That means researchers were able to exactly know what changes may be attributable to COVID. So that is the basic study. Let's look at it. And at the end of this talk, I will present to you some possible solutions. Researchers have given one solution which they think may be of use. I will add some more solutions as well that might be of use as well. So let's start our discussion. So here are the references. This is DrBeen.com. This is the abstract of that study. And the study itself, the whole document is here. I have this particular page open. We'll come back to this one. But if I go to the top here, this is the SARS-CoV-2 associated with changes in brain structure in UK Biobank. And if you see here, this is a PDF file of a peer-reviewed paper that has been accepted for publication. So it is reviewed and accepted. It was accepted on 21 February 2022 and was published on 7 March 2022. That is the basic structure. The data points that they have, which I was looking at before, we'll go back to that in a second. Let's first see what this study actually has. So references, this is the study. Then some of these references about olfactory system and its connections and its functions. And if you do not like Wikipedia, you can just pick up these topics and find them in the area or books or texts where you like them. So with this, now let's start our discussion. And during this discussion, my own picture will not be here because it kind of overwrites some parts of this picture and people cannot read it. So just let's go without my picture. So here's a study. It's a brain size reduction after mild COVID, review of their abstract. What are the possible issues here? So these are not the issues that researchers have put together. However, considering the type of brain tissue reduction and the type of system that are affected, the olfactory system is affected. So they're thinking that this is caused by the anosmia, or remember that some people get anosmia. So this they think is either the infection or the inflammation or disuse, atrophy, and I'll explain these later on, through the olfactory nerve, or the nerve for smell. The nerve for smell is an interesting thing. That is the brain gray matter or brain cells directly exposed in the dorsal or the posterior part of our, I shouldn't say posterior, dorsal, or let's say backside and roof of the nose. There the brain cells are actually directly exposed to the air or environment so that they can be connected with the molecules for odor. But that also causes viruses and others to travel up in the brain through that area. The other viruses are observed to do this as well. Here, so far, there has been no research that shows that actually SARS-CoV-2 travels along the olfactory nerve and goes into the brain. However, researchers think that that may be one of the mechanisms. So, what is the damage? The result of the olfactory system that is involved. Possible problems can be, of course, olfaction issues, that is, issues with smell. And remember, smell is also connected with flavor. Flavor is not just the taste, but the whole feeling of the food. For example, if you take the smell away and give the same person something to eat, they would actually say that this thing does not taste the same. So, what they're saying is that flavor is not there. So, olfaction issues, anosmia, that means no sense of smell, hyposmia or reduced sense of smell, or dysosmia, that means changed sense of smell. For example, after COVID, I felt that I could not smell coffee or taste coffee correctly. Phantosmia, that means phantom smells, that there is no smell there, but the person says, "Hey, do you smell this smell?" or "Do you feel the smell of this?" And that is phantom smell, because the smell actually is not there. It is their smell system misfiring. Hyperosmia, relatively rare but increased sense of smell. Hypogeusia, or reduced sense of taste, or even ageusia, that means no sense of taste, which is, people actually say that it seems like I'm eating cardboard because I just cannot feel what I'm eating or have the flavor. Auditory and visual integration with smell. So this is also very important in the olfactory pathway. And as I discuss further, some of these things will become clear. But in the olfactory pathway, that is the smell system in the brain, is integrated with other s- sensations as well, especially auditory, that is hearing, and visual. So that means you could actually look at the food and associate a specific smell that you may have remembered from the past. Similarly, you could do that with auditory or the audio as well. Similarly, a very important thing is that olfactory system or sense of smell or the smell system is connected to our limbic system. Limbic system is our primitive brain. It is that part of our brain that is always telling us that, hey, you should be scared, you should be afraid, you should be careful. This is the part that makes us feel hungry or thirsty, or gives us a sense of sex drive and so on. This is that emotional control system of our brain. The cortex, or the higher centers, in turn, are the one that help us be who we are, humans. So that integration with limbic system, sense of smell is a very important part. You know this, that in animals, their emotional behaviors towards the possible mate, for example, or for food, are driven by smell. Even the enemy or the friend are also driven by smell. The territories are driven by smell. So smell is a great um, sense for emotional aspects as well. Now, what they saw was, which is the really concerning part. So, sense of smell up and down, that's fine, not fine, but still, check this out. Researchers found that the patients with mild COVID had a faster decline in cognition. So, cognition is the thinking, connecting, recognizing things, being able to make sense of things, memory, all those things together are called cognition. And they saw a faster and more intense decline in cognition of the COVID, post COVID patients compared to other persons who were not COVID but were the same age and their images were also being taken. That this is the scary part. So that means the people may say they may have difficulty forming new memories. They may have difficulty reinforcing their existing memories. So remember that we can remember some things after it occurs for a few days and that we keep repeating it in our head. That is the reinforcement of that. Eventually, it becomes permanent memory or it is removed. So that reinforcement of memory has sense of smell or the uh, one part of the olfactory pathway, olfactory tubercle, that takes care of that. Behavioral problems can occur. For example, especially the stereotype behaviors. Stereotype behaviors are, for example, how does a man behave? How does a woman behave? So, our stereotypical behaviors, many of them are modulated by sense of smell as well. And when there is a problem with the smell and the problem with the brain tissue that is related to the sense of smell areas, then stereotypical behaviors can actually become changed. For example, the sex drive can be changed. Social responsiveness can be changed. A person may not be as attentive, may not be as responsive to the social cues as they were, or they may even become inappropriately responsive. Those things that socially are not acceptable, the person might actually end up doing those because they do not actually, they cannot connect the emotional and reward and punishment systems of the emotional memory. For example, let's say touching someone without their permission out in the public is, of course, a huge problem that can be a sexual assault. But when somebody thinks, let's say a normal human being thinks that, hey, I should do this, then their executive system, their frontal cortex, their personality tells them that, hey, you have learned this is not appropriate, you have learned this is not correct, you're not going to do this. This is a normal process. That kind of integration and responsiveness which has reward and punishment and emotions attached to some behavior, some decision, that can be, that can become incorrect when olfactory system tissue is damaged. There is one more part here, so let me explain that too. Abnormal expectation of reward and punishment, as I just said. Normally, whenever we think of something, we think of doing something, we're trying to make a decision, there is an expectation of what will happen, a possibility of reward or a possibility of punishment. That expectation gets distorted. Inability to suppress existing odor. So, this you may have actually noticed as well. What happens is that when we are present in an environment, we have a specific, all environments have odors in there. You're standing in a kitchen, you would have the smells or odors or fragrance of various foods or coffee and stuff like that. However, still, when you're standing there, you would slowly become adapted to that odor. And then, if a new odor comes in, for example, let's say a pet comes in the kitchen, and that pet, let's say, have a smell, you could smell that. And so, how does that function? How does that work? What happens is our frontal cortex. I'm going to go to um, myself for a second to kind of explain this. So, what happens is our frontal cortex, this part of the brain that is in this area, really above the eyes, it is called orbitofrontal cortex. This part of the brain, the tissue here is connected to the olfactory pathways. That tissue helps suppress the existing odors. And by doing that, it helps you realize new odors. Now imagine if the olfactory pathways aren't working correctly, then all smells or fragrances or odors will all be at the same time intensely available or all be suppressed together. So there will be a confusion about the kind of smell you have, about the environment, about trying to understand what is the odor, what should be your emotional reaction to it, and so on. And of course, that would also mean reduced attention. So going back to the presentation, so it's not just this simple as to say that the brain size is reduced. The problem is there is a possibility of functional problems. So now this study, as you saw, is peer reviewed, it is accepted February 21, accepted 7 March, it was published. Now, what did they do in the study? This is the high level discussion. We'll do a detail of the study separately. There were 785 persons whose images were done and were present in the UK Biobank. Their age was between 51 to 81. Then their second images were done as well after hundreds of days. And they found 401 individuals who had become COVID positive between the two images. 15 of these 401 were even hospitalized. And authors are very clear that their research showed this brain tissue change in mild COVID. Those who were not hospitalized had it as well. So you could think about it to say, all right, maybe the people who went to hospital, they got the damage. But authors are very, very clear that when they excluded these 15 patients, even then the remaining people had significantly reduced or changed brain tissue. They had 384 who were control. Now what they did was they had taken their scan at point A and they took their scan at point B. The average time of the patients, COVID patients, from their scan B to the COVID diagnosis was 104 days. That is a pretty good time. So that's more than 3 months. And authors found from their second image, when compared to their first image, they found that there was significant longitudinal effect. What does that mean? There was significant effect, there was change. So the image from point A or time A versus image from time B were significantly different. And even more different than the controls. Controls had the difference as well. But COVID patients had more change, more effect. And longitudinal simply mean long term. And authors say in their study that they still have to continue to observe them because what happens over the long period of time is still not known. Remember, this is 104 days on average, so 3 or 4 months. So the further images that would continue to come in, we will find out more and more what kind of outcome is there. Did that pathology, that change, stay, or did it become partially resolved, or did it become fully resolved? We don't know. Authors do not know that. So including global brain size reduction. Global brain size reduction means the whole brain reduced in size. So what were the three main things that they saw? Here is what they saw. Number one, they saw reduced orbitofrontal and parahippocampal gray matter. What does that mean? So first let's figure out gray matter. So our brain and all of our nervous system tissue is made up of two basic structures: the cell bodies, or the cell, which are neuron, and those cells have long wires coming out of them that are axon or dendrites. So if you take this as a cell, these are dendrites. With the dendrites, these are tiny branches from the cell. Through these dendrites, the cell receives incoming signals. They are like, you can say, the ears of the cell. And then through this long threads called axons, the cell sends the signals. For example, right now I'm speaking, and so my brain is sending muscle changes for vocal cords so that the vocal cord can move and I'm speaking. At the same time, you cannot see me, but I'm sitting at this desk and I'm moving my hands and I'm doing these things. So brain is sending wires to the muscles that are moving my body's parts. Those wires are called axons. Normally, the wires or the nerves are covered with myelin. Myelin is sort of an insulation, but it also helps them, our neurons, to conduct the signal rapidly at a higher velocity. Whenever we are looking into the brain tissue can be seen to be divided in two parts: collections of the nerve cell bodies. These together under the microscope are called gray matter. And then collection of the nerves themselves, the axons and dendrites. These are called usually white matter because they're myelinated, and myelin under the microscope looks white. So here, now let's see once again. They're saying reduced orbitofrontal and parahippocampus gray matter. That means, what is orbitofrontal? This part of the brain that lies above our eyes. So our eyes are called orbitals or orbits, right? So orbitofrontal is the part of the frontal, means the interior part of the brain, the front part of the brain. Orbito means the one that lies above the eyes. So orbitofrontal part is this part of the brain. This part of the brain has two kinds of functions in it. One is the executive decision making or thinking or the personality. And the second part is it is connected with the sensory systems so that you can receive the sensations and then integrate them to make decisions. For example, sense of smell. So you have the smell or fragrance of some nice food and you say, wow, this seems like a tasty food. So this decision of saying there seems to be tasty food is coming from the orbitofrontal cortex. And the information of good food fragrance or smell went through the olfactory system. So they saw that this part of the brain had reduced gray matter. That means there was less neuron cell body. So either they had become dead or they had become slim. A nerve cell body can shed, imagine if it is a bag filled with various molecules and chemicals and energy stores. And if that bag starts becoming empty, then it would become lean. So overall volume will seem to be reduced. It can also be reduced because the cells are actually dead. Both can happen. So they're saying orbitofrontal cortex, gray matter is reduced. And secondly, this blue area here, these are called parahippocampal. There are many structures over here. There is uncus here, there is parahippocampal gyrus here, there is hippocampal gyrus here, and so on. There are lots of structures here. But this blue area, for us, it is just simple that it is part of the olfactory pathway. So this area is damaged, orbitofrontal cortex is damaged. That is one that they observed. Then the second thing they observed was greater change in imaging biomarkers in the areas connected to the primary olfactory system. So when they were looking at the images of time A versus time B, and between the A and B there was infection, they saw that the olfactory system, the smell system, which starts from the olfactory bulb that is in the posterior part of our nose, roof of our nose, let's call it. Then the olfactory tract, then there is the stria. Stria are branches. There is this olfactory tubercle. Then here is the parahippocampus and this blue area, parahippocampus and hippocampus, then the whole limbic system, then the connection to the rest of the brain, including the orbitofrontal parts. They said that they saw olfactory system to be most changed. The whole brain was changed, but olfactory system was most changed. This made them think that it is possibly the olfactory system involvement, then this nerve for the smell, involvement of that nerve that then initiates the rest of the damage in the brain. So this is the second. So what was the first one? The first one was that the gray matter in the orbitofrontal and the parahippocampal gyrus was reduced. Second one was that the olfactory system was the most damaged or reduced or affected. And then there was a greater reduction in the global brain size. So remember, there are 401 people on one side and there are 384 on the other side in the control, and they were aging, and so their images were being taken, and you could expect some level of reduction in brain size. That would happen to all of us. It's not um, this is just how it is for the time being. Hopefully in the future, as the science advances, we would slow these things down. However, what they saw was that COVID patients, same age, in the same time, COVID patients who is recovered, was mild, their reduction in brain size was more than the same age folks who were not patients. So that is serious. That we cannot say that, all right, everybody, let's say I am 50, and I always give my own example. I don't want to give anybody else's example. So let's say I'm 50 and my brain size is reducing with age. And here I got COVID as well. Now my brain size would reduce compared to another 52 years old person, but mine would reduce faster and more. That is what they saw. So three main changes. Number one, orbitofrontal cortex, and the olfactory system. Number two, the olfactory system itself. And the third was the overall global brain size shrunk. The brain shrunk. Then the most serious thing was cognitive decline was more in COVID patients. So we couldn't say that the COVID patient, well, they had a little more brain tissue difference, but maybe that is really not very important. With age, it happens, and well, there was a little more change. But they actually found that the function of the brain, cognitive function, the personality function, was actually more impacted. And why the personality function? So I'm going to go back to myself for a second. So I'm using OBS and it's always a challenge to change. So why the personality function? Remember, the part of the brain here in the front is the frontal part of the brain. This part of the brain's job is to do executive functions, that is to make decisions, to decide uh, reward for a decision or punishment for a decision, then decide to do it or not to do it, and social behavior. All of those are here. The part of this frontal cortex that lies above the eyes here in this bony area, of course this is empty inside, that is the orbitofrontal cortex. So when the orbitofrontal cortex is declining faster, and when the olfactory system, especially the olfactory tubercle and the uncus, and I would show you those structures in the next lecture in the detail. I wanted to separate detail from the abstract. When those areas are also reduced in size and their function is memory, reinforcement of the memory, connection of the reward and punishment, connection of the auditory and visual stimuli, all of that go down. So the person generally becomes less aware, less social, less attentive, less able to recall, less able to make new memories, confused, less able to differentiate between odors, and less able to make good decisions. So going to go back to the presentation. Then the question became for authors, researchers, that what is causing this? Why is the brain gray matter reducing in size. So they have three theories. First theory is this one. Here they think that degenerative spread of the disease via olfactory pathway. So imagine this is the olfactory nerve. The virus, remember we have done this discussion in detail, that the virus infects the epithelium of this area or the connective supportive tissue of this area. And usually the study that we had seen said that virus does not infect the nerves. However, here is one hypothesis, that imagine the virus in the roof of the nose infects the nerve for smell. Then with that nerve, it travels, and then from there it travels in the brain, then goes to the other parts of the brain and start infecting those parts, causing degeneration. So this is one possibility. They don't have proof for these because they're only looking at images of the brain. So none of these are final proofs. They see the changes in the images, significant changes in the images. Now they're trying to figure out why. And maybe these all are not the case and something else is the reason. So this is one. Second, maybe when the olfactory epithelium and olfactory nerve areas in the roof of the nose, they become infected. Usually, at least so far, the studies say that olfactory nerve does not become infected. So imagine that the supporting cells, they become infected. And when they are infected, there is a lot of inflammatory markers or inflammatory molecules that are released. So maybe those inflammatory events are relayed inside the brain as well. And that then cause brain tissue problems. So that is true. For example, if we have a cut on our finger, depending upon how big and deep it is, there is a surrounding part which would not be healthy as well. So let's say there is no infection, but still there is a surrounding part that would be red and swollen and not functioning and painful. And imagine if the same thing is happening, but inside the brain, because it started in the olfactory epithelium. So that is one other possibility. A third possibility is what is called as disuse atrophy. Disuse atrophy is that our body has this general rule: if you don't use it, you lose it. So imagine if the olfactory nerve or olfactory area, epithelium, olfactory bulb and the epithelium in the roof of the nose became infected. That caused, remember in the discussion in the study, we said that when the roof of the nose area, the olfactory epithelium, becomes infected, it impinges on the olfactory nerve. It presses the olfactory nerve. So olfactory nerve doesn't work correctly. So when it doesn't work, then the next neurons that are connected to these nerves, which are then going to take the information to other parts of the brain, and the brain would work with those cells would start becoming degenerated. This is disuse atrophy. These cells are not getting any signals anymore. So those parts of the brain that are connected with the olfactory system, and a huge set of brain tissues are connected to the olfactory system, those systems are not getting enough stimulation from the olfactory nerve, and they would start dying or reducing in their function. That means they would also say that, hey man, I don't need to have, it's not necessary that they die. The neuron can say, well, I'm not getting enough stimulation to work, so I will become lean. I would lose my nutrition and I would lose the molecules in me and I'll become just thin. So if it is thin, it can probably be restored. But if it is dead, then it cannot be restored. So these are possible three mechanisms that they think may happen. So then the authors say, is this a reversible situation? Is it a partially reversible situation, or is this a persistent situation? They are not aware, and they say that we'll have to observe these patients in long term to figure out if their cognitive decline comes back, to figure out if eventually their future images do not have further rapid decline, and so on, and that decline becomes equal to other age mates as well. that is still not known, and that would still need to be looked at. My takeaway in this all was that the anosmia part, we should worry about it if it occurs. And I think that we have done this discussion that there is a drug that can be useful for anosmia, and within 2 3 days it can help restore and recover from anosmia. I think that drug should be part of the management. Not to, so I'm on YouTube here, so I cannot say IVM will help COVID, because YouTube would then just block my channel and this discussion. But I can talk about olfactory nerve and inflammation and ivermectin reducing that. And that has been very, very effective. So then what are the solutions? So one solution I just spoke about. I have been fortunate that the folks I have worked with who were taking IVM, they recovered very fast from anosmia. I would suspect then the brain tissue damage was reduced as well. Now, olfactory retraining is something that authors said. Authors, I believe, listed another study or past studies which had shown that people with anosmia, and anosmia occurs in Alzheimer's, it can occur with dementia, it can occur with the traumatic brain injuries, it can occur with other viral infections as well. So people with anosmia or hyposmia, reduced sense of smell, they can receive olfactory retraining. And that retraining, meaning what? I mean, I'm gonna generalize it. I'm not an ENT doctor, but asking them to have more, various smells and smell them more often, or have be around the fragrances more, to allow the brain to start developing and retraining the olfactory system. So authors thought that this may be one of the solution to do olfactory retraining. That means have some coffee around, or have some candles with the fragrance, or other things that have smell or fragrance, and expose yourself more to them. And that would help retrain and slow down, potentially slow down this deterioration of the brain. And the second thing that I always talk about with my patients, with my friends, with my family, I do it for myself as well: art. Art has or anything that you create. So we are always in two modes, right? So we are in the mode of um, learning or consuming, and we can be in the mode of producing. So when you are creating, that really activates the frontal cortex, limbic system, and the whole brain. So it is said in general that as we start aging, if we start doing some art, that would help us stay more alert. Not only this, when you are doing art, and art is keeping your brain activated, the ascending reticular activation system with the limbic system, they both become fiery and they become fired up. And when they become fired up, they send stimulation to the rest of the body as well, and your muscle tones increase. When your muscle tones increase, your muscle will tend to keep the nutrition in them, and the disuse atrophy of the muscle with age will become reduced. This is why doing art actually can reduce the deterioration of the body. So olfactory retraining, I would think it this way: during the disease, soon after the disease, IVM, I think, is crucial. Then, second part, and this would mean that it would be very interesting to do a study of the patients who got ivermectin, and then do their scans as well, and then compare them to see if there was a change. And the second is olfactory training. Third is my thought. IVM is also not author. Authors only thought maybe olfactory retraining. The third one is maybe art. And on that part, so Doug has a very good question, but let me complete my thought here. On that part, I was thinking about it many times when I share my artwork, doodles. These are not great. These are just my thoughts of how art is and my way of trying art. Sometimes people say that, why don't you teach us? Maybe we should actually, the cool beans, we have become responsible for our healths together. Maybe we should do art classes where I'm not a good art teacher, neither am I a good artist, but maybe just the process of creating. The only thing I would need is not to look at what I'm doing, but if we do it together. Even if you just draw that thing, which I am doing also, even in the air, or with a pen and a paper, or on computer, that would actually still stimulate the brain. So that may be a useful thing to do. So with this, we are done with this one. Yeah, yes, art classes. So if you would like, I can go over the actual study, which is thorough and beautiful. I loved it. Let me just show you very quickly a couple of um, diagrams from here. So if you see, this was interesting. So this is, if you look at this diagram, the first one here, top left, ratio brain total intracranial volume. So this is the global brain size inside the brain, inside the skull, the total volume of the brain. And there are two types of people here. The blue line is the controls, and the orange line is cases. So if you see, let me see if I can make it bigger. If you see here, the blue line folks had their total brain volume go down. I think that is with age. So from 0 all the way down to here about 0.25, 0.3. On the other hand, if you see the orange line, it went all the way to almost -1. That is how large the overall brain reduction difference was. Then, if you see here, right crust 2 of the cerebellum. So, cerebellum, the part that is in the back of our, in the posterior cranial fossa, in the back of our brain area, its function, it does many functions, but important function is it maintains our posture. It does the calculation of our actions. For example, if I decide to um, so let's say, if you look at my picture for a second, if I have to go from my finger to my nose and I close my eyes, so my eyes are closed, even then I can do this. Or if I put my hand over here, I can do this. This is cerebellum, which is helping the higher centers plan the movement to say, take it from here, bring it here. The speed of the movement should be this much, then it should reduce by this much to end up here without actually crushing the other side. And this is cerebellum's function. Cerebellum also helps us with uh, proper execution of the motor activity. Cerebellum also helps us refine the motor skill. If we are learning tennis or learning some other sport, cerebellum works very closely with basal ganglia to create the plans. So every time you hit incorrectly, it is the cerebellum and the basal ganglia and the limbic system. When you hit it incorrectly, you say, oh gosh, man, I messed up. That emotional reaction then allows the remaining parts, including the cerebellum, to retune your activity to say, okay, this person should not be so disappointed next time, so we are going to change our hit. And this is part of cerebellum's behavior. So cerebellum volume is reducing, then right lateral ventricle volume. So here, the ventricular volume, ventricles are cavities within the brain. If you see, the volume is increased, but that is actually not a good thing. If the ventricle, the cavity's volume is increased, if the empty area, it is not really empty, it doesn't have the brain tissue, it has the cerebrospinal fluid. uh, if that empty area has increased in size, that means that the tissue around it has become reduced, and this size is relatively increased. It happens to all of us with age, but here this was more than the controls. And then finally, left rostral anterior cingulate cortex. This is a part of the cortex as well, in the limbic area and in the buried deep in the cortex. And if you see here, once again, the volume is reduced in the patients. And they have also given beautiful diagrams too. And they have a lots of data. I mean, this, I love UK folks. Their studies are so rich, so thorough, so full of data that you can actually feel comfortable when you look at this. So these are various images that they did. These are also various images that they did. And you can see, for example, here, this is the temporal piriform cortex. Piriform cortex is also part of the olfactory system pathways. And once again, that cortex, if you see in the controls, much more change compared to the cases. Sorry, cases, the orange, much more changed compared to control. And same thing over here. So this is the discussion. I hope it makes sense. Let me know in your comment, would you like to do, especially long COVID patients who may have cognitive problems, who may still have anosmia? I think it is important for them to start retraining their olfactory system, maybe even use IVM at some point and start doing art. And this is my hidden way of saying, let's do art together. Again, I'm not an art teacher, I'm not even a good artist, but maybe we can just doodle together to keep our brain stimulated. Thank you very much. If you like this work, there is a link in the description for DrBeen premium account. And the price is really maybe equal to a lunch or two. It is so low. So take advantage of that. It is access to my premium courses. I think we have 800 or 1,000 videos over there. And these are in addition to these videos on COVID on YouTube. And those are, I love those videos. So take advantage of that. In addition to that, there are 3 links if you would like to buy me a coffee, or if you would like to use PayPal or become a patron. Those links are there too. So thank you very much. And I would see you in a few minutes again. Bye. Or yes, like, subscribe, and share.